Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Coates and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Trump names his border czar as Tom Homan, tasked with carrying out the president's pledge of mass deportation. Israeli strikes on northern Lebanon and Gaza have killed dozens of people, including children, as the new Foreign Minister, Gideon Saar, claims there's been progress on a ceasefire in Lebanon. And the British Prime Minister meets President Macron in France for Armistice Day as they discuss the Ukraine war and the re-election of President Trump. But first, let's start in Saudi Arabia, where the country's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has called for an end to military operations in Gaza and Lebanon. In an address before the Joint Arab League and Organisation of Islamic Cooperation Summit in Riyadh, the Crown Prince called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, condemning the massacre committed against Palestinian and Lebanese people. He also demanded Israel refrain from any further act of aggression. Here's what he had to say.
This summit is being held as an extension of the previous joint summit in light of the continued brutal Israeli attacks on the brotherly Palestinian people and the expansion of the scope of these attacks on the sisterly Lebanese Republic. The kingdom renews its condemnation and categorical rejection of the genocide committed by Israel against the brotherly Palestinian people, which has claimed the lives of 150,000 martyrs, wounded and missing, most of whom are women and children.
Joining me now is Dr. Abdulaziz Saga, the chairman of the Gulf Research Centre. Thank you so very much for your time. Firstly, urgent calls we're hearing here for an immediate ceasefire from the Crown Prince. In your opinion, how significant is this intervention today?
Thank you for having me first, and good time for everybody. I think it's an extremely important, almost a year ago, on the 11th of October 2023, Saudi Arabia have called for a large Arab, Islamic and Arab and Muslim summits that have taken place last year. And now again, today, they did regather again, and almost 94 between a country and organization have joined this important summit. The emphasis that the Crown Prince have put is to end an immediate stopping of the war and the killing of the mass killing and the genocide for the innocent people there also in Gaza and in Lebanon. I think what is interesting to see on the final statement, the communique, that issue of making sure that the international community do take care of their responsibility and pay enough attention to what they are supposed to do under the international law. Some time ago, unfortunately, we have seen countries have not really responded the way how they should respond to what is happening in Gaza and in Lebanon lately. But at the same time, the emphasis from the Crown Prince also been on the two-state solution as one of the Saudi important initiative started in 2002, and how important it is to continue this effort to bring an end to this situation and to bring peace and stability to the region. At the same time, it did authorize the Arab and Muslim Committee of Ministerial Council to continue their effort also and to encourage other countries as during this year, countries like Spain, Ireland, Slovakia, and other countries have joined. Norway, of course, have joined, and also to emphasize on the global commitment or the global coalition that Saudi have led since 28 September, and also the other meeting that took place in Riyadh, with regard to the effort of bringing more countries to recognize Palestine as a member of the UN. It is an outstanding effort. It's highly appreciated by the Muslim community and the Arab community, and many of the Western world that believe in fair and justice and believe in ending wars and ending killing innocent people.
Dr. Saga, the Saudi press agency also said that the key priorities for the summit include halting the aggression, protecting civilians, providing support to the Palestinian and Lebanese people, unifying positions and exerting pressure on the international community to take decisive steps to end the ongoing attacks and establish lasting peace and stability in the region. Can we expect a resolution or a joint statement?
Well, there will be a joint statement by the members' country, and I'm sure, it did emphasize in what you have just explained in ending the war and looking at the humanitarian situation and making sure that the international community do take care of their responsibility and be responsive to what is happening there. I think there is no disagreement amongst the convener and the meeting that have taken place are in full support of this direction.
And how can we expect Israel to respond to all of this?
I think Israel normally they respond once they see there is a big international consensus, and also there is a pressure from countries that they do have an important relation with, such as the US. And I'm sure when the US will be able to exert enough pressure on the Israeli to stop the aggression, to stop the mass killing, and to stop the genocide, I'm sure Israel would have to listen, because without the US outstanding support militarily, financially, and politically, Israel would not have been able to continue doing what they have done since 7th of October 23.
Dr. Abdulaziz Saga, we really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so very much for coming on.
Thank you.
To the United States now, and Donald Trump's White House staff selection as he continues to assemble his team after last week's win. Well, he's named Tom Homan in his so-called border czar. Homan is the former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and is expected to carry out Trump's promise of mass deportation. For more on this story, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. by our chief correspondent, Simon Marks. Simon, great to have you. Firstly, tell us more about Tom Homan. How closely have the two worked together in the past?
Well, they've been absolutely hand in glove. During the first Trump administration, Tom Homan headed up the Immigration and Customs Enforcement division for the president, Sarah. And absolutely, Tom Homan has been positioning himself for many months as the man who wanted Donald Trump to appoint him in order to lead this effort to deport potentially as many as 20 million people living illegally in the United States. Tom Homan spoke at the Republican convention in Milwaukee. I think it is fair to say that he shares the far-right views of many of former President, now President-elect Donald Trump's supporters, and he's a zealot in terms of his desire literally to scour the country, to detain illegal immigrants living in the United States and then throw them out of the country. Indeed, he's been giving interviews here today in which he has said to cities and states run by the Democrats, if you're not going to help us in this effort, get out of the way, because we are, if necessary, going to flood law enforcement resources into your cities, into your states, to round these people up and remove them from the United States. So in Tom Homan, Donald Trump has absolutely found the kind of Make America Again loyalist, the kind of person who absolutely embraces the populist right-wing infused agenda of Donald Trump, and who is both willing and determined to strip the country of millions of illegal immigrants who currently call it home.
And Simon, bring us up to speed with other White House appointments.
Well, we just got word within the last few minutes that President-elect Donald Trump is about to name Stephen Miller his deputy White House chief of staff. Stephen Miller, of course, one of the architects of Donald Trump's domestic policies, including the mass deportation. He will be far and away the most right-wing figure in the United States ever to hold a position as senior as deputy White House chief of staff. We've also learnt earlier in the day that President-elect Trump is nominating Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York as his next United States ambassador to the United Nations. Elise Stefanik, who was once considered a possible running mate for Donald Trump in the election, a congresswoman who, a little bit like Senator J.D. Vance, didn't embrace Trumpism when she first arrived in Washington, but then realized it was the movement of the future and absolutely attached herself like a barnacle to the president-elect. So her reward appears to be, if she can secure Senate confirmation, a posting to the United Nations. This is a woman who once threatened to pull America out of the United Nations if it continued with what she referred to as its anti-Semitic policies. So these appointments taken together, plus appointments that we had already learnt of late last week, absolutely add to the sense that Donald Trump is determined in 2025 not to make the mistakes that he thinks he made back in 2017. He's not going to find common cause with people who do not share his philosophical and ideological outlook. He is going to populate every single level of this government to the best of his ability with proven loyalists to his viewpoint so that he can begin the process of really moving forward with his agenda.
And Simon, let's now move to Trump's relationship with President Vladimir Putin. And there are conflicting reports over whether or not they did, in fact, have this phone conversation that's being widely reported. What can we make of this?
Well, it seems pretty clear from this side of the Atlantic that that phone conversation did take place. People close to President Trump, members of his inner circle, are telling multiple reporters that there was a telephone conversation late last week between the Russian leader and the president-elect, in which it is said that Donald Trump told Vladimir Putin not to engage in any escalation of the war against Ukraine. He also spoke last week, as you know, Donald Trump, to President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, a call in which Elon Musk also participated. There's no suggestion that Mr. Musk was on the line when Vladimir Putin's conversation with Donald Trump occurred. The Kremlin so far is not confirming that this conversation took place, and that may be because they want to present a different version of what happened in any kind of conversation to the Russian people than the conversation that Trump aides are relating. But it all indicates that as far as Ukraine is concerned, as with the war in Gaza, Donald Trump wants to get these two major foreign policy crises off his agenda as quickly as possible. I mean, he has said that he can resolve both of these conflicts on day one of his presidency. I mean, I don't think anybody fully thinks that that is likely, but it certainly indicates the extent to which he thinks that both of those conflicts are getting in the way of his main foreign policy desire, which is to start focusing on China. So that message to Vladimir Putin wasn't a message of withdrawing troops from Ukraine, but it was a warning not to escalate before Donald Trump finds himself in office.
That's Simon Marks in Washington, D.C. Simon, thank you. Let's go live now to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, where we're joined by our correspondent, Megumi Lim. Megumi, of course, Trump's win will have major repercussions for the war. Firstly, what is the latest on the ground at this hour?
Well, the latest on the ground in Ukraine is that things aren't looking very good for Ukraine, especially on the battlefield. According to Ukrainian and U.S. officials, the Russian military has massed as many as 50,000 soldiers in Russia's Kursk region, and this includes North Korean soldiers. Now, we do not know how many of the 50,000 are North Korean soldiers. But what we do know is that it is looking like Russia is planning a major counteroffensive to try to retake territory from Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region. Now, just to give you some background of this area, Ukrainian troops currently hold about 600 square kilometers of territory since it launched its surprise incursion to this region in August of this year. And this incursion was aimed to try to pull some Russian resources and manpower away from the main front lines in Ukraine's eastern region, where Russia has been and still is advancing. But according to a new U.S. assessment that just came out, Russia was able to amass this force of 50,000 without pulling any soldiers away, any of its troops away from the front lines in Ukraine's east. So this is, of course, bad news for Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are severely outnumbered by Russian forces on the battlefield. And we've seen, even without the help of North Korean troops, Russian forces have been able to claw back already some ground in the Kursk region. So now, with this major counteroffensive that we are expecting, the question is, will Ukrainian troops be able to hold the line and hold on to this chunk of territory that they hoped could also have worked as some kind of leverage in potential future talks with Russia?
And Megumi, I understand that Ukraine's energy officials shut down power in some 4 regions, fearing further damage from Russian missile attacks. With winter well and truly setting in now, tell me, how will people cope during these extremely cold months ahead?
That's right. Emergency power cuts began this morning, Monday morning, after the Ukrainian Air Force issued a nationwide aerial alert warning that a large number of Russian jets had taken off. And according to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia was planning to again attack the country's energy infrastructure. Now, this is hugely concerning because right now, Ukraine has already lost more than half of its power generating capacity due to attacks that took place in the summer of this year. And right now, Ukraine is mostly reliant on its nuclear energy infrastructure, which is also, of course, exposed to potential missile attacks from Russia. And experts are saying that if these attacks do continue against Ukraine's energy infrastructure, blackouts of up to 20 hours a day could take place in the winter months. Now, people here for this reason are expecting the worst winter of war. And how are they going to cope with this? Well, first of all, it's worth mentioning that this is not the first winter of blackouts that Ukrainians are having to endure. The first winter of war, Ukrainians endured long bouts of blackouts as well, just not as long as what we're anticipating this winter. Businesses have managed to adapt. They have bought diesel-powered generators to keep their businesses operating, restaurants, cafes, bars, shops, even though at a lower power capacity. But if these blackouts do last as long as 20 hours, these generators are not going to be enough. It's going to be devastating for the Ukrainian economy to see these businesses not be able to remain open during the winter months. But also just imagine for the people, you know, Ukraine is a country where temperatures can drop to as low as minus 20 degrees Celsius. It's going to be a very cold winter without electricity. And also just imagine people who are living in higher floors of high-rise apartments without a functioning elevator, having to walk up and down so many flights of stairs. And for many of these high-rise buildings, electricity supply being cut off also means water supply being cut off. So we are expecting a very, very difficult winter ahead, possibly not just with electricity cut off, but also water supply cut off for many people living here.
Yeah, certainly a very worrying situation. Megumi Lim there, live in Kyiv. Thank you. Let's have a look at the rest of today's news. World leaders have begun arriving in Azerbaijan's capital, Baku, for the annual UN Climate Summit, COP29. This year's focus is on how countries are planning on limiting long-term temperature rises. It comes as the United Nations says this year will be the hottest on record. The Prime Minister of Haiti has been sacked less than 6 months into the job. The country brought Gary Conny in to handle the ongoing gang-led security crisis. Mr. Conny has described his dismissal as illegal, adding it raised serious concerns about Haiti's future. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has been elected to another term, winning a runoff vote in Parliament to retain his position. The 67-year-old suffered a setback last month after his coalition lost its majority in the lower house. One person has been killed and 16 others injured after a shooting at a US university. The incident at Tuskegee University in Alabama took place during homecoming week. A 25-year-old man has been arrested and charged. Israel's new Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said just hours ago that there's been certain progress in efforts to end the fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Sa'ar says they're working with the Americans and that any agreement would have to include enforcement mechanisms to prevent Hezbollah from reconstituting its military infrastructure near the border. However, a Hezbollah spokesman says the militant group has not received any official proposals and will continue to wage the war. For more, I'm joined by our correspondent Giles Gibson live in Tel Aviv. Giles, lovely to see you. Firstly, what can we make of these comments from Gideon Sa'ar? Is there any optimism here that Hezbollah says it hasn't received this official proposal? Any optimism of moving forward, really?
Yeah, Hezbollah saying that they've not received an official proposal, but if you look at some of the language that a Hezbollah official used in Beirut just a few hours ago, they talk about testing the waters, initial ideas, and also a great movement between Washington, Moscow, and Tehran, and a number of capitals. So I think that does add to this sense across the region that the Biden administration is really now starting to put pressure on the different players in this conflict to reach some sort of a ceasefire deal. I suppose the problem for the Biden administration as their time in office ticks down is that there are just so many different players involved in this conflict and in this region. You have, for example, the Israeli foreign minister also saying that he wants to see the Russians, who of course have a military presence inside Syria, guaranteeing that no weapons cross from Syria into Lebanon and then into the hands of Hezbollah. So I suppose that the problem for the Biden administration is that, you know, they can push harder, they can take more risks than they've done in recent months, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they'll get what they want.
Just yesterday, Giles, the incoming Defence Minister, Israel Katz, at the swearing-in ceremony for Gideon Sa'ar said that Israel had defeated Hezbollah on the battlefield. Is this related to the statement above in any way, or is this just confusing?
I think confusing is the right word, because it just gives you a sense that there are these very mixed messages coming from the top ministers in the Israeli government. Just looking closer at some of the comments that Israel Katz made, he talked about the crowning achievement of that victory being the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. And if you look at the stated aims that Israel announced when it said that it was going into southern Lebanon with this ground offensive, they're very different to what Israel Katz is talking about. For example, they said that they want to return thousands of displaced citizens from northern parts of Israel who've been pushed out of their homes by repeated rocket attacks. And look, just in the last 12 hours or so, there have been a series of rocket attacks across that northern part of Israel, and also a little bit further south, the IDF saying that around about 90 rockets were launched towards the city of Haifa. So in that sense, the Israeli military, the Israeli government have not achieved the stated aims of this offensive.
And Giles, just with regards now to Gaza, that deadline that was set by the United States, November 13, to get more of this desperately needed aid into the Gaza Strip or risk a weapons cut-off. Is there any indication that more aid is getting in, or even that Israel is heeding these calls?
Yeah, Sarah, there are a few indications that more aid is starting to flow into Gaza. We've had the IDF telling us that they have expanded the humanitarian zone that's been set up in the south of Gaza, and observers who are at different checkpoints between Israel and the enclave of Gaza said that very early on Monday morning local time here in Israel, there were more aid trucks flowing into the area. The expectation is, or the estimate is, that around about 150 aid trucks are moving into Gaza every single day. That compares to about 30 or so back in October, when the Biden administration really made this sort of veiled threat to the Israeli government. But I think you still have to look at that in the wider context of the fact that the UN say that before the war started, there were about 500 aid trucks going into Gaza on a daily basis. So at the moment, the numbers are, yes, they're going up, but they just do not compare to the amounts that aid officials are saying that they need to see every single day.
Certainly right. Giles Gibson live in Tel Aviv. Giles, thank you. Let's have another look at the rest of today's news. One woman has been injured and flights from major airports have been disrupted after Moscow was targeted with the biggest drone strike since the war with Ukraine began. Russia's defense ministry says 70 drones were shot down overnight in its territory, including 34 over the outskirts of the capital. Britain's Defence Secretary says Donald Trump is committed to NATO and is right to push other European nations to shoulder the security and economic burden. John Healey denied reports the incoming US president-elect will end his country's relationship with the military alliance. The Prime Minister of Spain has announced a new economic relief package worth over $4 billion in the aftermath of the country's worst natural disaster in 60 years. 220 people were killed around the area of Valencia last month, with many still reported as missing. Well, many are blaming Pedro Sanchez's government for being badly prepared and responding too slowly. Well, the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has visited Paris today for the annual Armistice Day celebrations. Arriving at the Elysee Palace, he was met with a hug and handshake from Emmanuel Macron as the two leaders discussed the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, as well as Donald Trump's recent re-election win. And for more on this story, I'm joined by our correspondent, Olly Barratt, standing by in London. Hello, Olly. Firstly, is this being seen as a successful meeting between the two leaders? And do we know what was discussed inside?
Hi, Sarah. Well, London and Paris certainly feel that this was a successful meeting. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, really going out of his way to extend a personal invitation to Keir Starmer and really welcoming him with open arms, as you were saying, in Paris. We saw them inspecting military service personnel together. We saw them laying a wreath together for Armistice Day. But there were also discussions in a meeting before the Armistice Day commemorations were attended by both the leaders together. We are told by Downing Street that they discussed Ukraine, they discussed the Middle East as well, they discussed the issue of illegal migration as well. But as you were suggesting, clearly the backdrop to all of this is the re-election of Donald Trump in the United States of America and what that might mean for various spheres of cooperation between the UK and France with relation to Ukraine, the Middle East, climate, with Keir Starmer also leaving France and heading to Baku for the COP29 summit in Azerbaijan as well. So certainly London and Paris feel that this was a successful meeting with a lot to discuss, and as I say, all of it being seen through the prism of the re-election of Donald Trump in the United States.
And Olly, Starmer's British government has been critical of Trump in the past. Is there hope that France could become more of a British ally?
Well, you also have to remember that this comes after an election of a government here in the UK insisting that it wants to reset its relations with key European Union allies. And since the re-election of Donald Trump, when it comes to trade policy, for example, the British and other European countries are really looking at contingencies if, for example, Donald Trump does go ahead and impose swathes of tariffs on goods being exported by European countries to the United States of America. So that absolutely will have been on the agenda for the discussions between the two. That said, London is convinced that it can have a positive relationship with the incoming Trump administration as well. It's put quite a lot of effort into that. With regards to Ukraine policy, what we understand was likely to be discussed between the two today was the issue of Storm Shadow missiles and whether the British and the French can persuade Joe Biden to authorize the use of Storm Shadow missiles by Ukraine deep inside Russian territory. That is something certainly that the Ukrainians would like, especially in the context where there is fears in Kiev of perhaps American support tapering off when Donald Trump returns to the White House. So Ukraine will have been front and center in these discussions. Downing Street not giving us any detail today on whether there was any progress made when it comes to discussing Storm Shadow missiles and their use by the Ukrainians and the potential sign-off by the current President Joe Biden. But certainly that is what we expect that they were discussing in these meetings. There are lots of ways in which the UK feels it can be close to European capitals, partly as a result of the re-election of Donald Trump. But as I say, this is a government that came into power here in the UK saying anyway that it wanted to boost its ties with European countries post-Brexit.
Olly Barratt live for us in London. Olly, thank you. To business news now, and the price of Bitcoin has risen above $80,000 for the first time. The record surge coming after Donald Trump's election win last week, with Trump promising during his campaign to make the United States the crypto capital of the world. Meanwhile, the euro has taken a hit 4.5-month low against the US dollar today. It's as investors express concern over potential US tariffs proposed by the incoming president-elect. To sport now, and world number one Yannick Sinner is on course to win the ATP finals for the first time after beating Australian Alex de Minaur. The Italian has already won the Australian and US Open titles. Meanwhile, Czech player Barbora Krejcikova has asked for respect and professionalism in sport after comments were made about her appearance by journalist John Wertheim. Wertheim has now been taken off air after making a jibe about Krejcikova's forehead during the WTA finals in Riyadh. The new manager of Manchester United says he's ready to take on the difficult task when he arrives from Portugal. Ruben Amorim leaves Sporting Lisbon and has signed with the Red Devils until June 2027. He takes over from Erik ten Hag and manager Ruud van Nistelrooy. Let's remind you of tonight's top stories. Trump names his border czar as Tom Homan, tasked with carrying out the president's pledge of mass deportation. Israeli strikes on northern Lebanon and Gaza have killed dozens of people, including children, as the new Foreign Minister Gideon Saar claims there's been progress on a ceasefire in Lebanon. And hugs and handshakes on the steps of the Elysee Palace. The British Prime Minister meets President Macron in Paris as they discuss the ongoing Ukraine war and the re-election of President Trump. And that's it for all of us at W News. Thanks for joining us. GNT with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next.